Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Millennials to Millionaires. I'm Tuya State.
I'm Daniel King-Sold. We have a very, very special guest in the building. Her name is Elle Mejia. She's the founder of Pretty Girls Work. She's also an avid real estate investor. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for this conversation today.
No, for sure. Awesome. So tell us a little bit about your journey. Like, how did you get started in real estate?
How did I get started in real estate? I never know how to answer that question because it's not really a very robust answer. I don't think it's necessarily that I had a passion for real estate when I started as much as I knew that it was a vehicle to be able to make money. And so I kind of got into it knowing that it was going to be the difference that it made for me in my life financially. So I started off, while I started doing my real estate courses intending to be a real estate agent, I started off at Cushman & Wakefield, one of the more international commercial brokerages, just as an industrial assistant for one of the top industrial producers in Ontario. And I assisted him for a year while I studied for my real estate exams and did my real estate exams, and kind of started to get my feet wet that way. Left Cushman & Wakefield after I was licensed and did residential real estate for about 5 minutes. Wasn't really my vibe. Hit the ground running, got a lot of success right off the bat, but definitely didn't really speak to who I was as a professional and what I wanted to do in the business. And so I kind of fell into retail leasing. One of the last transactions that I did residentially was for a business owner who owned a lot of different retail businesses globally and ended up working for his company for a few years, handling their retail leasing globally. So I've actually completed transactions on both the landlord and the tenant side across Canada, the United States, Germany, the Netherlands, Singapore, New Zealand, South Africa. Just kind of got thrown into the game that way and had to learn a lot of things as I went. And right now I'm actually handling the retail leasing in Ontario for one of the major landlord developers in the country.
Wow. Yeah. So what was that experience like, traveling overseas and handling real estate transactions? What was the language? Was there language barriers?
You know what? Everywhere that I went, I was able to communicate in English. Yeah? Sure. Germany was probably the only country that wouldn't send me a lease in English. They sent me a lease in German and said, figure it out. So funny enough, I don't speak German, but a lot of the lease terminology, I can go through a lease and pick out what the major business terms are. I think the biggest thing was, it sounded a lot more glamorous than it actually was. I can tell you what all the Ubers look like, what all the airports look like, and the shopping centers, because that's what I was doing, but not a whole lot of fun tourist travel, except for when I was in South Africa, just because I had a weekend in between meetings. But it was really it was a big opportunity for me to grow within the business, because the company that I was working for didn't have a real estate team. I was the press for leasing, and it just hit my cell phone. Okay. Exactly. So it just forced me to kind of be on my toes about everything. And I was reporting into people who knew how to run a successful business, but didn't necessarily know how to place themselves in different markets and in different international markets where we'd have to do the research and didn't necessarily know where they would fit in. So it was definitely an experience for me in learning things as you go and in kind of forging that success for yourself on the bottom lines of it. But it was a great experience. I loved every minute of it.
No, that's key. And obviously the elephant in the room is COVID-19. And I know you deal with the retail sector, and obviously people are working from home right now, and a lot of businesses have taken a large hit financially. Right. A lot of companies have closed. Even million and billion dollar companies have been forced to shut their doors. Yeah. We always talk about, real estate and, all the benefits and all of these things and how to help kind of build a solid foundation. Can you kind of talk to us a little bit about the retail aspect and how COVID has impacted businesses and how that's impacted exactly what you're doing?
It's impacted everybody, right? It shut down everybody it shut down everybody for a few weeks, and we've kind of been slowly plowing our way through and opening as we go. But within the retail sector, specifically with what I do, I'm a landlord and an investor as well. So in my own properties, it taught me a lot about what type of tenancies are probably going to be sustainable moving forward. So
that's very key.
Exactly.
Yeah. Certain businesses are recession proof, right?
Certain businesses you're always going to need. So I have a building that has 6 commercial units on the base, for example, and 4 residential units at the top. Those 6 commercial units, I've got a medical office, solid. Yeah. A dental office, solid. Convenience store, solid. Yeah. But then I have a nail salon. You need to take a look at that sector because a nail salon is going to be closed before medical offices.
For sure.
And just looking at different uses like that. If you're looking at the enclosed malls, for example, the enclosed malls have probably been in trouble for the last decade or two in terms of retail real estate. And that's why they've been pivoting more towards experiential shopping experiences for consumers, because that's what they're looking for. Because if it was just about getting the right store and getting the right price, they could do that online.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so they've been pivoting that way anyway. And now we're seeing retailers that are looking more towards open air centers, because the first stores that were able to open their doors back up were the stores that had the street facing entrances and exits. So it's just taking a look at what's happening. It doesn't mean, like, we've been hearing that retail is dead for the last 40 years, 50 years. We think that retail is dead because of the onset of online shopping. It's just different. It's not dead. And so just being able to stay ahead of the curve and understanding what you're going to need to do within your sector. I'm very proud that the landlord developer that I work for, we're large enough that we were able to work with the majority of our tenants. You drive through our centers right now, our tenants aren't closed. It meant a lot of abatements. It meant taking advantage of the subsidy programs from the government. It meant providing support to those tenants who didn't qualify for those programs, just to make sure that we stayed afloat. But it really is just about being able to see around those corners and see what you're going to need to do to evolve and to adapt, because standing in one spot and complaining about what's going on isn't going to change the fact that it's changing. It's changing and it's happening, and you're going to need to pivot, or you're going to need to move out of the way. That's just kind of the way it is in every industry. So it's really not that different of a conversation in retail.
Well, that's very key. So you mentioned that you own a multi-use commercial property. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I know a lot of people would look into getting something like that as a goal, as opposed to just a residential home.
Yeah, I think that's really the next conversation for millennials, period. We spent the last couple of decades just kind of teaching and hand-holding millennials and how to get into the real estate market, period. And it was really about home ownership and being the end user in your own home. And not to say that wasn't an easy feat. Like it was definitely a challenge, but that conversation has pivoted into investment properties. And so we see a lot of millennials that now do own a second condo that they're renting out, or some who have taken the leap into getting a duplex or a triplex, and maybe they live in one unit and they rent out the other 2 units and cover their mortgage and make a couple of extra $100 every month and kind of capitalize on the equity that way. But I think that there are a lot of people within this age group and even within our own communities who don't recognize that these multi-use properties are accessible as well. And when you look at the way that the metrics work down, the way that the numbers work down, you can cover your mortgage and bank on the equity of some of these properties the same way that you would a duplex or a triplex. And it's just kind of about deciding what it is that you're going to try and do. I'm having a conversation right now with a good friend of mine, because we're looking into going into a property together, but we're looking into turning it into kind of like a mini medical building, because it happens to be in close proximity to a hospital. The only thing that makes that a medical building is us deciding that we're only going to lease to medical professionals and calling it a medical building and putting a sign on the side that says medical building. But for some reason, I think that type of conversation and those types of properties are still seen as a little bit inaccessible. People don't see them as being an option for them in their real estate portfolio. And I think now more than ever, with the onset of COVID-19 and really just how the economy's been in flux for the last 5 or 10 years, it really is about diversifying your portfolio. So real estate is the moneymaker. We know that, but there are different facets of real estate that you can enter into to make sure that you're covering all your bases.
100%. So in the case of a commercial property, something like that example, like you're going to get a commercial property and then look for medical tenants, how would one go about attaining that property?
The same way that you would go about attaining any other property. So is
the financing different?
The financing would be different. The financing is different, especially if you already own a property. So you'd probably be looking at the 20% margins for your deposits. You'd probably be looking at, like, for myself personally, we looked into private lending. The numbers just made a lot more sense for us, and trying to go through public lenders whose metrics are far more stringent, and they require you to have far more liquid than some of these private lenders would. So that just made more sense for us in terms of entering into the market. But it really is just about looking at your numbers, figuring out what your deposits are going to need to be. It might end up being a 3 or 5 year plan if it's something that if it's the direction that you want to go in, and just get an understanding of what type of property it is that you want to look at, what region of the province it is that you want to look at. You're probably not going to be able to jump in with an $8 million property in downtown Toronto, but that's not the people in the suburbs need nail salons and medical offices and dentists too.
Yeah.
And those properties are going to be a lot better priced and for someone who's looking to enter into the market that way. But it's just about planning. It's really not that different of a process, especially when you're in the same situation as a buyer when you're buying a commercial property in Ontario as buying a residential property, which is you get the benefit of getting a commercial real estate agent and paying them $0 to do all of your due diligence. So take advantage of it. Their commission is going to be paid by the seller the same way it is in a residential transaction. There's no reason why you can't at least sit at the table and have the conversation and see how it would work for you, and making a decision at that point, as opposed to just thinking that it's not a conversation anyway.
So when you're going to find financing, would the financiers take into account the potential rental income that you're going to get?
If it's already tenanted, if it's already tenanted and you can show them leases and you can show them leases with term, so leases that have another 13 months, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years that are on that, they'll take that into consideration. In my experience, it depends on the lender whether or not they'll take forecasts of what that rent would be. Yeah. If you can build a strong enough case for it with comps or with leases that were pre-existing on the property, or what the market is saying for this type of unit, for comparable units. But the easiest thing to do is to have it tenanted beforehand. The way that I've structured my deals with the last property that I bought, we had a period in between when we actually firmed up on the property and when the property closed, where we had it written in our agreement of purchase and sale that we could start marketing the property and start getting tenants and leases signed in there even before we took possession, because that was going to be an important part of our financing. So there are different ways that you can work around it and plan for it, but it's definitely an accessible thing to do.
What metrics or factors were you guys considering when you guys purchased that property?
This property, I knew that I wanted it to be multi-use. I think that that's just the smartest game in real estate right now anyway, because
safe as well.
It's safe. It protects your investment. It means that if one sector goes down, I'm not dead in the water. It's essentially not putting all of your eggs in one basket, even in talking about that one property. So I knew that I wanted it to be commercial res. I had thought that I would only, just based on the way that my portfolio was looking, I thought that we'd be looking more at an industrial property at first. And so I was looking for an industrial retail property. The industrial markets and the retail markets tend to be a little different in terms of pricing that you can charge tenants. So industrial properties, you charge less per square foot than a retail tenant would, just because of proximity to highways and visibility and that sort of thing. So that's what my intent was going into it. But just through my research, I just thought it was a lot more prudent to look at a retail residential combo instead.
So with the climate right now, we see with residential real estate, when you're buying an investment property, sometimes or oftentimes you're running a deficit, right? Like I have a few rental properties that I have to chip in a couple bills every month, right? With your commercial experience, do you find that you're cash flowing, or are you running a deficit, or are you running a substantial cash flow?
So I don't know everybody's situation. I personally cannot afford to run a deficit. That's just point
it's like, I need that bag.
Exactly. Not necessarily a bag, but you know what? The carrying costs on that type of property can get astronomical if you let it. Yeah. So the way I have triple net leases in my property, which means that they pay a minimum rent per square foot, but they also pay a common area maintenance fee per square foot. TMI. So I say CAM and taxes, but TMI is essentially the same thing. So the common area maintenance, it means that they're all paying their proportionate share for my maintenance of the parking lots, my maintenance of the sidewalks, my maintenance of the lights in the parking lots, all of that sort of thing. And then they pay their proportionate share of the real estate taxes as well. We estimate it and then balance it out at the end of the year. Okay. But I try to make sure that my CAM charges are as accurate as I can be in what it's going to cost to maintain the property, because that way I at least know what my break even needs to be. Yeah. So right now in that property, I know that if I have 2 vacancies, I'm still covered. If I have 2 commercial vacancies and 2 residential vacancies, I'm still covered. Okay. So it's not.
So you're running a good enough surplus, basically.
A good enough surplus
to stay afloat.
Yeah, it's not going to be something. It's not going to be the surplus that someone can stop working and stay home over.
Yeah, for sure.
But it certainly takes care of making sure that you have money in the bank in case any issues arise, in case you have a capital expense that you didn't expect coming, in case you have a repair bill that you didn't expect that you all of a sudden need to take care of, or making sure that you can take care of legal fees if you have a problem tenant that you all of a sudden need to deal with. And I think that's important as well, not breaking even and ending up at zero at the end of the month, because then you're just kind of crossing your fingers and hoping nothing goes wrong. But it's
a lot of risk.
But in this property, I'm still also just banking on the equity. I'm looking at.
Is it an equity play?
Exactly. Yeah. It really is. It really is. And I think in Ontario, in the GTA certainly, it's hard to come by a property that's not an equity play.
Yeah.
No, that's very key. And I want you to talk about just kind of being a landlord from a commercial side versus residential, because I know it's a little bit different, and I can speak from experience. I know when COVID hit, for one of my properties, one of my tenants, I didn't get the first month, and I'm just like, okay, we'll be okay, and the next month came along, and then I started to sweat and really think, okay, this person's self-employed. They're not making any money right now, and they can't continue to stay here. I then realized, which I already kind of knew, that tenants have a lot of rights where they could essentially pay first and last, and you can't really kick them out. Like, you have to take them to the landlord and tenant board. And that's the worst part, because I called the landlord and tenant board and the phone just kept ringing out.
Because everybody's calling the landlord and tenant board.
They were closed, and they're like, you know what? You can send us a fax. Nobody's here, but when we open back up, we'll maybe give you a call. So with residential, I feel like the landlords have a lot of rights. When it comes to commercial, if somebody stops...
Not as many rights.
You can just change the locks on someone. Because what I found out, it was illegal for me to change the locks in my own house.
Absolutely.
And I said, you're telling me that this person can go without paying me for 10 months and I can't kick them out?
Absolutely.
So talk to us a little bit about that when it comes to being a landlord for commercial, and how that's different.
I've dealt with it on both sides, and I actually, the landlord rights in Ontario, in my personal opinion, are atrocious. Absolutely atrocious. The laws and the policies are so tenant leaning that it's almost as if they were written and I think that this is what a lot of people have in mind, because even at the beginning of this pandemic, everyone was saying, stop the evictions, don't allow landlords to be able to evict their tenants. Okay, but then also make sure that the bank can't foreclose on my property. Let's make sure that happens first, because that happens faster than the eviction process on a regular day, let alone during COVID. So I think that a lot of people have in their heads that these landlords are all these big, huge corporations, and so they can deal with it, and why you need to protect the little guy. A lot of landlords in Ontario are people like me and you guys that, we're not these mega corporations. We've got a little bit of a portfolio for ourselves. We're making some moves, but we need the rent. And on the commercial side, I can say that you don't end up in situations like that where it takes months to kick out a tenant. It's pretty set in the lease document what the process is going to be. If your rent is this much late, I will send you a default notice. If you do not cure that default inside of X amount of days,
see you later.
Done. Locks changed, and everything in the unit is mine.
It's yours.
Is mine.
So all their furniture, if they have money in the till, all of it belongs to you.
But everything is forfeited. Everything belongs to me. Now, mind you, it's now you're talking about a business play, because does it make sense to do that in the middle of a pandemic and end up with a vacancy that sits on your book for 2 years, as opposed to just working with a tenant that you've had on your property that's been a good tenant that just needs help getting through this next few couple of months.
Having some rough times.
Exactly. So you kind of need to look at it as a business move as well. You don't want to kick out a tenant because of 3 months of hardship that especially when you know what's going on and you know it's not them and you have a history with them. Chances are the best business play for you is going to make sure that is making sure that you work with that tenant in getting through this and applying for the subsidies that they need to apply for, and getting as much as you can at the table and making sure that everyone's okay, so that next year it's back to business as usual and they're paying their rent and you're happy with a good tenant and you don't have a vacancy on your hands. But the rights it's definitely more fun being a commercial landlord than I've had some stories as a residential landlord. So I think there needs to be some revamps in the systems that way. But
no, for sure. Do you have any tips for young millennials that are watching this right now that eventually want to get to that point, but feel like, getting a property like that size is so astronomical. Like, should I just start off with a house and, you know, build up some equity, maybe refinance or flip it? Should I get pre-construction? Like, for someone that wants to follow in your footsteps, like, how would you recommend getting to where you are right now?
First of all, I'd say don't follow in anyone's footsteps. Everyone's situation is very, very different. You can look at what someone has done and not understand what credit they had supporting them, what assets they had supporting them, what outside investors they had supporting them. I think that the best thing to do if you're in that position and you want to move forward is engage a professional who can help you have those conversations, who can look at your situation specifically, who can look at what your cash flow is, what your income is, what properties you have, what equity you have in those properties, and what's going to be the best way, like what's going to be the best plan for you, and then what's going to be the best way to execute that plan. But we have the benefit in Ontario, especially of having access to these professionals for $0. Like, there's no reason to not pick up the phone or go online or go on Instagram and find someone who you resonate with, find someone who you feel is competent and who's going to have your best interest. Interview 10 of them before you decide to go with somebody, and then work with someone who's going to work with you on a long-term basis on their goals. And a lot of professionals prefer those types of relationships anyway. Like, as a real estate agent, you want someone to come to you and say, this is my goal for the next 5 to 10 years. I want to acquire X amount of properties. Can we work on this together and come up with a plan so that when we buy a property, you're working with someone who already knows that you want 2 properties next year. So how are we going to be able to leverage this one to get there? Work with a mortgage broker who knows all of the ins and outs of your finances, so that every time you go to them, you're not starting from the beginning in terms of trying to explain, what your income is, what your cash flow is, and all of these different scenarios. I think you just surround yourself with people who know what they're talking about and take their advice.
No, that's very key. I see that you brought a book here.
I did.
Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yes, I think we were talking about books that really kind of made a difference in the way that you looked at things. And this is one of I actually had to go digging in the basement. Yeah. For this book
you went in the archives.
In the archives, because this is a book that I read at the very, very beginning of my career. And funny enough, there are a lot of tidbits of information in here that I wouldn't actually classify as good advice. But the overall premise of the book was really treating yourself as a corporation. And that shift in mindset was all the difference. Because in terms of looking at yourself, just at the individual, not at the companies that you own, and not because I feel like I'm in a room of serial entrepreneurs.
Yeah, for sure.
And so if you get caught up in what all of your different businesses are doing and how all of your different businesses are running, it really comes back down to who you are and what your purpose is and what your plan is and what your definition of success is, and building everything out that way, building your marketing plan out that way, building your business plans out that way. It really comes down to who you are as the corporation. And so this book was really instrumental in me looking at myself that way, not looking at myself as a woman who is trying to make it in this industry, looking at myself as a corporation who's going to leverage the assets that I have to attain success here, and really understanding what tweaks you need to make to how you interact with people and how you present yourself to people. Because if you look at the way that a company runs itself, if you look at the way a corporation runs itself, a marketing plan or a branding plan is the same as how you dress when you walk into a boardroom.
Yeah.
It's what you're presenting to people before you decide what it is that you're going to sell to them. So establishing who I was as a business, as a brand, just me personally, allowed me to really plan out and map out what I wanted to do business-wise and career-wise and financially.
In life, I think your brand precedes you anywhere you go,
whether you like it or not. You already are a brand, whether you know it or not. So you either take control of what you're communicating to people, or you don't, because people are going to make a decision on what it is that they've seen walk into the room anyway. So just decide what it is that you want that to be.
Oh, for sure. My last question, just to wrap up, one of my lifelong dreams have been to be featured in Forbes. Right? And when I was going on your Instagram and I saw in your bio that that you've been featured in there with your company Pretty Girls Work, can you tell us a little bit about how that came about and how?
I'll give you a tip. Actually. There is a system called, I'll tell you exactly how it happened. There's a platform called Help a Reporter Out, I think it's called, or something along those lines. Google it and it'll pop up. And it's essentially a service that a lot of writers that write consistently for publications use when they need to consult with different professionals in different categories. So you essentially get emails 3 times a day that say, we're looking for an expert to speak about this. And they're working on really tight deadlines. So a lot of times it's that they need a quote within the next 2 hours. Yeah. They need a quote within the next 4 hours. Yeah. So I was literally just answering these emails on experts, and it didn't say the publication, but I have Google Alerts turned on for my name, as every business person should. Google Alerts. So anytime my name pops up on the internet, I get an email. So I just got an email saying that Elle Mejia, Pretty Girl's work, was quoted in this article. And I was like, what is this? And I clicked in, and it was a Forbes article, and I lost my mind. But again, it's one of those things that even I thought was inaccessible. So what I was doing in trying to use that platform was end up on blog posts and, e-magazines and stuff like that globally, and try and get my name and my brand out there. And there are ways to get in front of these people and to get in these rooms and in these conversations and at these tables that are very accessible. It really is just kind of about opening yourself up to it and deciding that it's something that can absolutely happen for you, because it can happen for anybody that takes advantage of the opportunity, right?
So what is the Pretty Girls Work movement?
Pretty Girls Work, we're a platform that produces positive and progressive programming for women who want to fill the gaps in their career advancement and their development. So primarily focused on female founders and entrepreneurs, but we used to host in live events, but we host virtual events.
Now we're on Zoom.
Yeah, virtual events and workshops. And one of the things that I'm really excited about is we're actually announcing the Pretty Girls Work podcast network, which is going to be just a roster of women-led podcasts. We have a 2-time Olympian and Pan Am medalist that's going to be running a women athlete podcast. We have the This Girl Sells Real Estate podcast that we already have 1 season of, is going to be coming back as a part of that podcast network as well. We've got Lindsay Tompkins, who is a phenomenal career and confidence coach. And I mean, she's done 7 figures just in her courses alone, who's going to be teaching women how to do the exact same through a course called the Brand Lab. She's going to be running that podcast. Just a lot of really, really powerful conversations with women who know what they're doing.
Okay, can we tune in as well, or is this just for ladies, or what's going on?
I suppose.
I suppose if you pay, you might as well.
7 figures, that's a big number.
Yeah. She's fantastic. She's phenomenal. And these women really know what they're talking about. And they're not talking to you about things in theory. They're going to be talking about things that they've done, things that they've experienced. They're going to be speaking with women who are doing that right now. Like it's not conversations that are happening in theory. We have too many of those people who want to tell you how to do things that they've never done themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's a lot.
That's amazing.
Even online right now or on social media, you see a lot of women that are now becoming entrepreneurs and getting into business. It's a beautiful thing to see women sort of break that sort of gender norms or the gender stereotypes.
And I think that's one of the silver linings I think that's come out of the last 7 months. All of this crazy COVID stuff is just seeing the creativity of how people have been able to pivot, whether it's projects that they'd started before COVID that they all of a sudden need to shift and change, or things that were born as a result of COVID-19 and being at home and having the time or maybe not having the choice, but to figure out what it is that you're going to do, and seeing all of the stuff that's come out of that. It's been really great.
So there are alternatives in OnlyFans.
I mean, OnlyFans is an alternative. You don't have an OnlyFans yet?
There's other content that you
don't have an OnlyFans yet? I think you could.
Yeah, you think so? What kind of content you think you should put out?
You know what? Maybe that's an offline conversation.
Okay, sounds good.
But I mean, I don't think that that's a bad idea. No, I don't.
Sounds good. So you told us, yeah, for sure. Okay. You talked to us about a book. What is it called, and who's the author?
She Inc. Kelly Keene.
Okay, that's amazing.
Yes.
All right, so all the ladies checking out our podcast, we have a lot of female viewers. Be sure to check out that book.
Yeah.
And in closing, do you have like a favorite quote or anything that you live by?
Can I share 2?
Sure, 100%.
Yes, because I couldn't decide when you asked me. So the first one is one that I actually find that I use all of the time. It's Michelle Obama. And she talks about an experience that she had. Well, someone asked her, because she's been in so many rooms with so many powerful men and sat at tables with men who are top of their field internationally, and men who are considered brilliant and coming to the table. And she was asked how she felt comfortable, or how she kept her confidence up, and how she felt like she would belong at those tables. And she said that the first thing that she thought to herself is, or realized when she started sitting at those tables, is that a lot of those men aren't that smart. And so I say that to myself now because I think at the beginning of my career, I had enough confidence to where I was walking into rooms and feeling like I belonged there. But the higher you go up, and especially jumping into things like jumping on a plane and going to Singapore to talk to a room full of men who are like, why is this black girl walking in the room?
Yeah.
Like it can rattle you.
It's
a little
intimidating.
bit. Exactly. So to be able to walk into a room like that and think and look around and think to yourself, a lot of these men aren't that smart.
And you're confident in what you're saying.
And you know what you're saying. You know what you bring to the table, and being able to bring that. I find that I use that in more situations than I like to admit. But then also I have...
in this room of all men.
I'm still in a male-dominated industry. I actually didn't even book that it was all men until you said that. It's just very comfortable. But the other one that I actually have as a quote on my phone, and I don't know who said it, but it's on the homepage of my new iOS 14 home screen.
Okay, shout out Apple.
But it's never give up, never take anything personally, and never take no for an answer.
All right, that's what I'm talking about.
Cool.
Thanks.
Yeah,
100%. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Millennials to Millionaires podcast. Elle Mejia, thank you for blessing us with your presence.
Thank you for having me.
Brilliant.
100%. Yeah, it's an amazing episode. I am Daniel King Sold.
I'm Tweet to Estate.
And this is another episode of Millennials to Millionaires. Thanks for tuning in.